How did the son of an imprisoned drug lord end up on a private plane in El Paso, Texas?
You think they could simply have killed him.
Rivals start to move in, and it gets extremely bloody.
If I was a betting man, I'd bet on him getting away with this.
Mayo Zambada, the legendary leader of the Sinaloa Cartel, has finally broken his silence. After months of speculation, the man who evaded capture for over half a century is now telling his side of the story. And what a story it is. In a shocking twist, Mayo now claims he was kidnapped by none other than El Chapo's son, Joaquín Guzmán López. So this wasn't some daring escape or clever DEA operation. It was an inside job that goes deeper than anyone could have imagined. But why would El Chapo's own flesh and blood turn on his father's longtime partner? What drove Guzmán López to betray one of the most powerful figures in the criminal underworld? And can we trust Mayo's version of events? This story is about to challenge everything you thought you knew about the fall of Mayo Zambada. It's a warm July morning in 2024, and a sleek private jet is cruising over northern Mexico. On board is Ismael El Mayo Zambada, the 76-year-old kingpin of the Sinaloa Cartel. He thinks he's on his way to a routine business meeting to inspect some new landing strips for his many operations. Sitting across from him is Joaquín Guzmán López, one of the sons of the now imprisoned El Chapo. It's clear now that this plane is basically carrying Sinaloa royalty. However, Guzmán seems nervous. Does he know something he's not sharing? And is this really the routine business meeting El Mayo has been led to believe? The plane touches down on a small, nondescript airstrip. El Mayo stands up, straightening his signature cowboy hat. He's expecting to be greeted by some local officials, maybe even the governor of Sinaloa himself. That's what he was told anyway. Instead, as the cabin door swings open, El Mayo is confronted by a sight that makes his blood run cold. Standing on the tarmac is a group of heavily armed men in tactical gear. In that moment, El Mayo realizes he's been set up. The first thing they do is grab El Mayo, leaving little room for interpretation. This is in fact an ambush. And just like that, the long reign of El Mayo comes to an abrupt and inglorious end. Now, this is where El Mayo's version of events diverges sharply from the official story. According to his lawyer, Frank Perez, El Mayo was not just arrested, he was kidnapped.
El Mayo says, I did not turn myself in and I did not come voluntarily to the United States, nor did I have an agreement with either government. To the contrary, I was kidnapped and brought to the U.S. forcefully and against my will.
This bombshell statement, released just days after his arrest, has thrown this entire operation into question. But El Mayo is not done yet. He goes on to provide even more details about his alleged abduction.
He also says he was ambushed by a group of men who assaulted him, adding he was subjected to physical abuse and forced into a private plane that came straight to El Paso, where U.S. federal authorities were waiting for him.
If these allegations are true, they paint a picture of a brutal betrayal orchestrated by Guzmán López. But why would El Chapo's son turn on El Mayo? To understand that, we need to look at the changing dynamics within the Sinaloa Cartel. After El Chapo's arrest and extradition, there was a power struggle brewing. On one side, you had El Mayo and his faction. On the other, you had Los Chapitos, El Chapo's sons, including Guzmán López. The old guard, represented by El Mayo, was clashing with the new blood of Los Chapitos.
And the Chapitos, like their father, they like the glory, they like being glorified in narco corridos, and the spotlight is on them.
This stark difference in approach was causing serious tension within the cartel. El Mayo, known for his low-key style, was increasingly at odds with the flashier, more aggressive tactics of the Los Chapitos, but taking on El Mayo directly would have been almost impossible. Think about it this way: the man had connections that ran deep, and people under his command were as loyal as they could possibly get. So, Guzmán López had to be smart about it. And what's smarter than turning your enemy over to the authorities and coming out looking like a hero? However, Guzmán López's plan, if that's indeed what it was, didn't quite go as expected. In a twist that no one saw coming, he ended up in handcuffs right alongside El Mayo.
How did the son of an imprisoned drug lord end up on a private plane in El Paso, Texas?
This unexpected turn of events has led to speculation that Guzmán López was playing an even longer game. Some experts believe that by turning himself in, along with El Mayo, he might have been hoping to strike a deal with the U.S. authorities.
The fact that they went through the effort of bringing him here to be prosecuted would suggest that Guzman has arranged for or is hoping for some sort of lenient treatment by the U.S. authorities.
But here's where it gets confusing. If the story would end here, it would be a pretty straightforward narrative, right? Well, when it comes to what actually happened inside that plane that day, not everyone seems to be on the same page. Guzmán López's own lawyer tells an entirely different story. According to him, there was no deal and no agreement with the authorities.
There has never been an agreement with the government with Joaquín Guzmán López. There is no agreement, period.
And as if this dramatic plot twist wasn't enough, El Mayo's allegations of kidnapping have thrown a wrench into the legal proceedings. Now, U.S. authorities, for their part, have remained tight-lipped about the specifics of the operation. But this silence has only fueled more speculation and conspiracy theories. Adding to the intrigue is the reaction of the Mexican government itself. They claim they were completely in the dark about this operation, raising some pretty serious questions about things like international cooperation.
It appears that Mexican authorities had no role in any of this operation. They have said so publicly. And seem to be scrambling for information about what happened, just like everyone else. You know, the U.S. has worked hand in hand over the years with Mexico, but that relationship has become more difficult over the years.
Think about it. El Mayo, cruel as he may be, is still a Mexican citizen, and critics argue that the U.S. meddled in what should have been Mexico's internal affairs. But no matter how you spin it, this lack of communication between the U.S. and Mexico is troubling, to say the least. If this was a legitimate law enforcement operation, why keep the Mexican authorities out of the loop? And if it wasn't, well, that opens up a whole new can of worms. Some experts are even suggesting that this whole operation might have been part of a larger power play within the Mexican government itself. After all, El Mayo claims he was led to believe he was meeting with the governor of Sinaloa. If that's true, it suggests a level of high-level cooperation that goes way beyond your typical law enforcement operation.
Mark this. The Mexican government is complicit in these drug cartel organizations, no question about it.
This explosive claim isn't as far-fetched as it might sound. The level of corruption that's been exposed in Mexican law enforcement and politics over the years makes such a scenario disturbingly plausible. Could it be that certain factions within the Mexican government saw El Mayo as a liability and decided to get rid of him? Or was this a genuine attempt by honest officials to bring down one of the biggest players in the global drug trade? The truth is, we may never know the full story, but one thing's for sure. The arrest of Mayo Zambada has opened up a Pandora's box of questions about the relationship between cartels, governments, and law enforcement on both sides of the border. Let's take a step back and look at who El Mayo really is. This isn't just any run-of-the-mill drug lord we're talking about. Ismael Zambada Garcia is a legend in the narco world, a man who managed to build and maintain a criminal empire for nearly half a century, pretty much undefeated. But as astonishing as that might sound, what made El Mayo truly stand out from the rest was his elusiveness.
We haven't really had a photo of this guy probably for 25 years.
It's easy to see why most people, including Jack Riley, also known as the former head of the DEA, thought El Mayo could very well evade justice forever.
If I was a betting man, I'd bet on him getting away with this.
So how did this master of evasion end up in handcuffs? The answer to that question depends on who you ask. According to the official story, it was a brilliant sting operation, months in the making. But El Mayo's version paints a very different picture, one of betrayal, violence, and potentially illegal actions by law enforcement. The truth probably lies somewhere in between, but wherever it lies, the consequences of El Mayo's arrest are likely to be far-reaching and potentially devastating. Let's consider the potential fallout for a moment. The Sinaloa Cartel isn't just gonna roll over and call it quits now that El Mayo's gone. There are plenty of ambitious underlings ready to step up and claim the throne.
The concern is, however, that when you take out a top kingpin like this, that it creates a power vacuum and that there's fighting to sort of fill that. and fill their shoes.
This power vacuum could lead to a wave of violence as different factions within the cartel vie for control. And it's not just internal strife we need to worry about. Rival cartels might see this as an opportunity to move in on Sinaloa territory. Chris Swecker, a former FBI official, gives us a pretty scary prediction of what might be coming.
Typically, when you make a high-level arrest like this is one of the top leaders of the Sinaloa Cartel, El Chapo's organization. Things tend to get violent, even more violent than they are normally, and violence is the norm in Mexico. So when you take off a top cartel leader, the other leaders start vying for power, rivals start to move in, and it gets extremely bloody.
Plus, it's not just Mexico that needs to be worried. The potential for violence isn't limited to south of the border. The Sinaloa Cartel has tentacles that reach deep into the United States.
Now we have open borders, and despite the most recent executive action, the cartels, the open borders have enabled the cartels to become the most powerful criminal organizations in the world. They are making billions and billions, and the open border did nothing but enable them. And they have infiltrated into the United States even more so than they did before. And there's no way to put this toothpaste back in the tube.
Cities could see an uptick in violence as different factions vie for control of distribution networks. The instability in Mexico could lead to an increase in other criminal activities that directly impact the U.S. We're talking about human trafficking, weapons smuggling, and money laundering on a massive scale. But perhaps the most insidious impact is one we can't easily see or measure: the corruption of American institutions. If the cartels are indeed as deeply embedded in the U.S. as some experts fear, we could see attempts to influence local politics, compromise law enforcement, and infiltrate legitimate businesses. It's a threat not just to public safety, but to the very foundations of our democracy. One thing is clear, however: the fall of El Mayo Zambada isn't just a Mexican problem. It's a crisis that could have far-reaching consequences for communities all across the United States. And addressing this crisis will require a level of international cooperation that, so far, has proven unattainable. Now that we've explored the immediate fallout of El Mayo's arrest, let's dive deeper into the potential long-term consequences of this seismic event in the narco world, because the ripple effects of El Mayo's fall are likely to be felt far beyond the borders of Mexico for years to come. One of the most pressing concerns is how this will affect the balance of power within the cartel world. With El Mayo gone, who's going to step up to fill his shoes? Will it be Los Chapitos, the sons of El Chapo, who've been itching to take full control of the cartel? Or will rival organizations see this as their chance to move in on Sinaloa territory?
Why prepare? Because it's not clear what happened. There could be a different response from criminal groups if it was a surrender or a betrayal between cells of the same cartel.
This uncertainty is creating an extremely tense atmosphere in the cartel world. Everyone's waiting to see who will make the first move, and when they do, it's likely to set off a chain reaction of violence. One thing's for sure: the next few months are going to be crucial, and if history has taught us anything, it's that transitions of power in the cartel world are rarely peaceful. We could be looking at a full-blown cartel war that makes previous conflicts look like playground scuffles. But let's not forget about the broader implications of El Mayo's arrest. If his claims of kidnapping are true, it raises some serious questions about the methods being used in the war on drugs. Are law enforcement agencies resorting to illegal tactics in their desperation to catch high-level targets? And if so, what does that mean for the integrity of the justice system? These are not just abstract legal questions. They have real-world consequences. If El Mayo's arrest is found to be illegal, it could potentially invalidate the entire case against him. That would be a massive blow to law enforcement efforts and could embolden other cartel leaders. Moreover, the alleged involvement of El Chapo's son in this operation adds yet another layer of complexity to the entire situation. If Guzmán López did indeed betray El Mayo, it could signal a major shift in cartel dynamics. Are we seeing the end of the old alliances and the beginning of a new, more ruthless era in the drug trade? And let's also consider the international implications of this event. The fact that Mexican authorities claim they were kept in the dark about this operation is troubling, to say the least. It suggests a breakdown in communication between U.S. and Mexican law enforcement agencies, which could have serious consequences for future anti-drug efforts.
When you have those volumes of money that are associated with the drug traffic coming through a relatively a still developing country like Mexico, it does create enormous distortions in the system. And so in that sense, a trajectory of escalating violence, increasing corruption, a direct challenge to political authority.
If high-level government officials were indeed involved in El Mayo's alleged kidnapping, it would just go on to prove just how deep this corruption truly runs. The arrest of Mayo Zambada isn't just about one man, it's about the potential fall of an empire. The Sinaloa Cartel, under El Mayo's leadership, was one of the most powerful criminal organizations in the world. We're talking about a group that at its peak was believed to be responsible for smuggling 25% of all illegal drugs entering the US from Mexico. So when a man like this falls, it sends shockwaves through the entire criminal underworld. But here's where it gets interesting. Some experts believe that El Mayo's arrest might not change much at all. Why? Because the Sinaloa Cartel isn't just one man or even a group of men. It's a system, a well-oiled machine that's been running for decades.
I don't think that they will have any significant impact on the inner workings of the Sinaloa Cartel. And as an example, I will give to you exactly what happened when the leader of the Sinaloa Cartel, Chapo Guzmán, was extradited to the United States. Had no impact.
This perspective suggests that the cartel has become so entrenched and so institutionalized that it can basically continue to function even without its top leadership. It's a pretty grim thought, and one that raises some serious questions about the effectiveness of the kingpin strategy in the war on drugs. So, what we're looking at here is a potential bomb waiting to explode. Will the Sinaloa Cartel implode in a blaze of internal conflict? Will rival cartels swoop in to claim territory? Or will it be business as usual, with new leaders stepping up to fill El Mayo's shoes? Only time will tell, but one thing's for sure, the Mexican drug trade is in for some turbulent times. Let's circle back to El Mayo's claims of kidnapping. If true, these allegations could have serious legal implications. In the world of international law, the manner in which a suspect is brought to trial can sometimes be as important as the charges themselves. If it can be proven that El Mayo was indeed kidnapped and brought to the US against his will, it could potentially violate the extradition treaty between the US and Mexico. This could, in theory, lead to the case against him being thrown out. But even if the case proceeds, El Mayo's claims have already cast a shadow of doubt over the entire operation. They've raised questions about the tactics being used in the war on drugs and the level of cooperation, or lack thereof, between US and Mexican authorities. This lack of coordination is troubling. Effective international cooperation is crucial in the fight against transnational criminal organizations like the Sinaloa Cartel. If US and Mexican authorities can't work together effectively, it gives the cartels a significant advantage. But let's not forget about the role of corruption in all of this. The sad reality is that drug money has a way of finding its way into official pockets on both sides of the border. And let's also consider the potential consequences of El Mayo's arrest on the drug trade itself. Some experts believe that taking out top leaders like El Mayo can actually lead to an increase in violence and drug trafficking in the short term. The reasoning goes like this. When a major leader falls, it creates a power vacuum. Lower-level members of the organization start vying for power, often violently. At the same time, rival cartels see an opportunity to move in on territory. The result is often a spike in violence. Moreover, in the chaos that follows a major arrest, drug production and trafficking can actually increase. Different factions within the cartel may ramp up their operations in an attempt to prove their worth and claim leadership. All of this means that paradoxically, the arrest of El Mayo could lead to more drugs on American streets in the short term. It's a sobering reminder of just how complex and challenging the war on drugs really is. But what about the long term? Can the arrest of figures like El Mayo make a difference in the grand scheme of things? Opinions are divided on this point. Some argue that the kingpin strategy, focusing on taking out top leaders, is ultimately ineffective. They point out that new leaders always seem to emerge to take the place of those who fall. Others maintain that these high-profile arrests do have value. They disrupt cartel operations, even if only temporarily, and send a message that no one is beyond the reach of the law. The truth probably lies somewhere in between. While arresting cartel leaders is undoubtedly important, it's clear that a more comprehensive approach is needed to truly tackle the problem of drug trafficking. This might include addressing the root causes of drug addiction, improving economic opportunities in areas where cartels recruit, and finding ways to reduce the profitability of the drug trade. It's a pretty difficult task, to be sure, but the alternative, allowing these powerful criminal organizations to continue operating with impunity, is simply not acceptable. As we wrap up our exploration of El Mayo's arrest and its potential consequences, we're left with more questions than answers. What will happen to the individuals arrested that day? Will their removal from the streets lead to a decrease in violence? Or will others simply step up to take their place? And what about the broader community? How can they be supported and empowered to resist the lure of cartel life? These are complex questions with no easy answers. But here's the thing, the battle against cartel violence is far from over. It will take the combined efforts of law enforcement, community leaders, and residents themselves to create lasting change. The fall of El Mayo Zambada isn't just the end of a kingpin's reign, it's the final curtain on an entire era of the drug trade. But as one chapter closes, another now begins, and this one's being written in real time, with ink still wet and the ending far from certain. Will the next act be a bloodbath of cartel violence, or could it be the opening scene of a radical new approach to the war on drugs? Hey, thanks for watching. What should be the top priority for law enforcement and policymakers moving forward? Is it cracking down harder on the cartels, focusing on rooting out corruption, or is it time to consider a completely new approach to drug policy? Feel free to share your opinion in the comment section below. Also, if you've enjoyed this video, please make sure to give it a thumbs up and to subscribe if you haven't already. Until next time, stay safe.